This is a story about something that was really scary at the time, but kind of funny in retrospect. Once I was driving through an unfamiliar stretch of desert and mountains on my way to a campground in Utah. The sun had set and it was pitch black outside. We hadn't seen a town for a long time, which was fine because we didn't need fuel, but it's worth noting here that before it had gotten dark, the last several exits that had been marked on the map didn't appear to have any people at them. There weren't many other cars on the road that we could see, but eventually this vehicle came up behind me, clearly going much faster than I was. He passed me on the left, and as he went around me, I could see that it was a pickup truck with a lift kit. The pickup got back into my lane in front of me. He stayed there for a few seconds, then suddenly swerved to the left and slammed on his brakes. He then cut back over into my lane so he was behind me and switched on his brights. He followed me like this for some time, getting right on my rear and flashing his brights repeatedly. I started getting nervous at this bizarre and aggressive behavior. I told my wife to help me find a populated exit. The road began to spiral down a steep mountainous slope. What followed next was a progression of increasingly alarming road signs that seemed like they belonged in a Looney Tunes cartoon where a character is about to careen off a cliff. These signs said things like, "Watch for wildlife," "Frequent wildlife crossing," "Next 20 miles," "Watch for ice," "Watch for falling rock," etc. None of them would have been scary on their own, or maybe in the daylight, but at night, in a situation where I was starting to panic, they seemed alarming, and it seemed like they were ridiculously increasing in severity. At one point, a sign popped up that said, "Road damage." Since I was in panic mode, I remember exclaiming, "Why don't they just fix the damage instead of putting up a sign?" Eventually, we found a town with lots of lights, and I promptly exited. I was terrified the guy would follow us, but he went on past me. I pulled into a gas station, and that's when I figured what I probably should have realized a long time before. I had my brights on. I drove taxi during the night shift, and among many crazy and terrifying things, I saw a toddler, 2 to 3 wars. It was about 1 a.m., and I was driving in a very wooded part of our town, just after dropping a customer off, and in the middle of the road was this baby just sitting in the dark. I stopped my cab and turned on my flashers. I proceeded to walk up to the kid, and he just started bawling. I tried to comfort him, but me being in disbelief that a baby with no one around was just sitting there, all I could say was, it's cool, bro." I picked him up and he started crying frantically. I would too if a stranger came and grabbed me. I put him in the passenger seat and looked for the nearest driveway. It ended up being about 100 yards down the street. I pulled up into what I hoped was his house, and there was maybe 6 or 7 teenagers drinking in the garage. I couldn't see from the road because all the houses had long dirt driveways. When I pulled up, they acted as if I wasn't even there until I said, "Hey, this your kid?" After a few "whats?" they came over to the cab and said, "Aiden, where did you go?" Like the baby just goes for midnight strolls. Not a thank you or goodbye or anything. They just took the baby in the house and continued drinking and laughing. As I pulled out, I felt as if I should call the cops or something, but couldn't bring myself to do it. I'm still scared to this day that I'll be driving down a dark road and hit a baby. Driving home one night from my fiance's house, normal night on the Florida highway. It's pretty dark, not too many lights, cruising at around 75 headed over a slight hill, just big enough that you can't see the other side. Get to the top and start making my way down the hill, and very suddenly in my headlight view I get a giant construction vehicle with all of its lights turned off and parked in the left lane of the highway. I really, seriously pray to God that no one hit that parked construction vehicle. It was one of the ones that digs up dirt, I think, on the highway that day. I very, very narrowly avoided smacking right into the back of that thing. I don't know how the Cherokee I was driving at the time handled the sharp turn I made into the right lane to avoid the vehicle. Needless to say, I was very nearly dead. Immediately called Florida Highway Patrol and told them about it. I hope they got to it before someone got hurt, and I really hope someone at that construction company lost their job, because they could have killed multiple people. A body in the ditch. Thought it was a deer as I approached, and then my brain was like, deer don't wear boots. I was shaking as I did a U-turn to make sure the person was alive. They were. Just drunk, and some people stopped as well, and emergency was called. I was so shaken up by it. When I first started learning to drive, I was working for my dad, and one day after work he asked if I wanted to drive home. I was like, all right. So I got on the highway headed for home, and while driving, I looked in the rear view and a guy on a crotch rocket was coming up behind me. I thought nothing of it. I was sure he would pass or slow down. I look ahead again, and a few moments later I hear this sound like metal scraping against the ground. I look around and then look back into the rear view, and the bike was on its side, spinning down the highway, and behind it I could see the biker on his back, legs and arms flailing kind of like a baby on its back in a crib. Then I watched as he disappeared under the vehicle behind him. I was so freaked out driving after that I didn't want to drive for weeks following the incident, then eventually got over it. Still, I can see the guy in my mind just sliding along the ground, flailing about, then being swallowed under another car. I was working at a restaurant as a cook. We did full menu till 11 hours p.m., then apps and burgers till 1 hours a.m. I tended to pull the solo night shift because I would walk out the door at 1:05 a.m. and the kitchen was stocked, clean, and perfect. It was a long night. Stupid FOH kept sending back food orders after 1 hour a.m. I didn't leave till 2 hour a.m. 30-minute drive home, and I was exceptionally tired. I lived in the boonies of Wisconsin at the time, a good 5 kilometers outside of town, which was 500 people, 2 churches, and 9 bars. I hit the little 24/7 truck stop just at the edge of that town for some munchies and smokes, and made the final trek home. Encountering deer was not uncommon out there, so I was going slow, when what appeared before me, to my tired eyes, was a monster. It had a huge, round body, this crazy long neck, a pointy head, and only 2 legs, right in the middle of the road. Scared the ever-loving fuck out of me in that state. Thankfully, it stood there for a second. Brain re-engaged. It's an ostrich. Okay, not a monster. Just an... What the fuck is an ostrich doing wandering around in central Wisconsin? I looked at it. It looked at me. I blinked. Nope, still there. Pretty sure it's real. Finally, it trundled off into the forest. What? I grabbed my cell phone and called the tiny little police station in town, non-emergency number. So, I'm really tired, so please laugh at me and tell me to go home and sleep and ignore the call, but I'm pretty sure I just saw an ostrich on Highway XX just outside town. She started laughing hysterically, then assured me that, no, I'm not hallucinating. There's an ostrich and emu farm on the other side of town. Guy raises them for the kitsch places in town for meat. Some drunk driver felt that turns are for pussies. Went up, over the berm, through the fence, and through most of the barn. There's still 4 animals, including the one I just spotted, unaccounted for. Where are you exactly, and which way did it go so we can round it up? I gave her the info, finished the last few miles home, and died in bed. Wild night, man. A lot of people that drive for a living or have done balls to the wall, cross-country drives can tell you about the running shadows. First time I saw him, I was on the tail end of 12 straight hours of driving. I was driving through the middle of nowhere, in the desert, at night. Very little light from the sky. No man-made lights even on the horizon. Just the pitiful cone from my truck's headlamp. And being in the middle of the desert, it pretty much only lights up the road ahead. Nothing above ground level to catch the light. As I'm barreling along, I start to see shadowy figures running alongside my truck out of the corners of my eyes, on 2 legs and 4. All I can think about is the creepy stories you read online about shit that lives out in the desert, or the Asian ghost stories where, if you don't acknowledge the spirit, it can't harm you. So I've got my eyes glued to the road, refusing to let them flicker off to the side. I rolled my windows up and cranked up the volume on my radio. Drove like that for probably an hour and a half until they slowly petered out roughly 15 minutes outside of a little one-light town. I've had people try to carjack me. People try to rob me after I pull over to render aid. People jump out at me on Twisty Mountain Road. You name it. But nothing matching that level of fear the first time I saw them. Felt like my spine was rippling like a ribbon in a wind trying to jump clear out of my back and hide under the seat. Sleep deprivation mixed with sensory deprivation does some strange things. I used to deliver pizza and often had deliveries right at midnight when we closed. One time, late at night, I'm driving back to the store through a small neighborhood. Up ahead, I see something. It's perfectly spherical, bright shiny, thing, just hovering about 6 feet off the ground, not moving at all. I pull up very slowly. Still doesn't move. Still can't comprehend what I'm looking at. Just this shiny hovering orb in the road at midnight. At this point, my curiosity has overridden my fear. I'm the guy in the horror movie who dies first because I just gotta know. Either I die or I get a cool story, right? So I hop out of the car and slowly walk up to it. I'm right in front of it and still can't understand what I'm seeing. So I reach out and touch it. It's a balloon. One of those foil birthday balloons with the streetlights shining on it, making it look weird out of context in the middle of the night on an empty road. I was on I-70 in Colorado going towards Utah, pulled over at a gas station at 8 p.m. Fueling up, I noticed a couple of attractive women pumping gas. On the other side of the pump was the man in his late 40s, just staring at these young women without notice of anything else going on around him. I walk inside to go grab some food for the next few hours of driving. When I come out, I see both the younger women's car and the older man's truck are gone. I decided to hang out at the gas station for the next hour to catch a little sleep before hitting the road again. After driving for a few hours, I was speeding heavy. I pull over at yet another gas station. The young women are there getting gas and eating some food on a picnic table. Looked like they had been there for a while. I didn't see any sign or the man in the truck, but can't say I was looking very hard for it. Well, here is where it got creepy as hell. Can't say I didn't stare at them a bit. I mean, they were good-looking women. As I am watching them leave, I see in the next parking lot over some headlights turn on, and it's the same man as before. He leaves when the women leave once again. Okay, that's a bit weird, but could just be a coincidence as there weren't many places to pull over. I leave a few minutes later and catch up to them. Now this guy is riding their ass with his high beams on. I decided to slow down and stay a distance behind the truck. 10 minutes or so later, the women pull over once again to most likely get this guy off their ass. With a sign of relief, the truck keeps going and I continue on my way. About 1 mile down the road, the guy just pulls off to the side of the highway. So I pull off a mile or so down the road again. Sure enough, the women drive by and the guy is still following them. At this point, we are out in the middle of nowhere and too many coincidences have happened. I called the cops to alert them, and in about 15 minutes the cops pulled the guy over. I could have just seen too many horror movies that started like this and overreacted, but you never know. better safe than sorry. Whilst driving from Morelia to Ciudad Hidalgo in Mexico, back in the 80s we had two ways to get to Ciudad Hidalgo, which was the National Road or the Old National Road, which was called Mil Cumbres. Mil Cumbres basically means 1,000 curves. That stretch of road literally had 1,000 curves, so a lot of people would get motion sickness when on that road. One evening on our way back to my grandparents who lived in Ciudad Hidalgo, my grandfather was driving and he loved taking Mil Cumbres because it had really nice views and he just really loved driving that road. But since we had the new national road, not a lot of people use that road anymore, so it was kind of desolate with the exception of passing one or two little towns. It was dusk so soon that meant that being on such a desolate road in the mountains, we would be in complete darkness on the road with no many other cars on the same stretch of road. It took 2 hours to get to the town on that road, so maybe 45 minutes into the drive it had already gotten really dark, and as we were driving, my grandfather started slowing down. I was sitting in the back seat because my grandmother was in the front with my grandfather, so I kind of stood over the front chairs to see why he was slowing down. That's when I saw a hug tree log blocking the road. My grandfather came to a stop and immediately started going in reverse to turn around and get out of the immediately. After we turned, my grandfather stepped on the gas pedal and I was sort of thrown back into the back seat. I immediately turned around to see if I could anything, and as we were speeding away, I could see men, very dimly since the light from the tail lights from the car were starting to get dimmer and dimmer, coming from out of the adjacent trees next to tree log on the road, with flashlights and guns. We were about to get robbed, and thanks to my grandfather's quick thinking and taking action immediately, we avoided it. That was the last time I was ever on that road. July of 2014. I was en route home after a 2-week vacation. I was alone, towing a fifth-wheel camper with my pickup truck. It was about 10:30 on a Saturday night, and I was about 2 hours from home and was planning on making it home yet that night. I was in a stretch of 2-lane road in Wisconsin that has very few houses and a 30-mile-long road. It is wooded on both sides with shallow, sloping ditches that are mowed by the county. It is fenced at the tree line. There is only one combination bar, restaurant, motel, campground through this whole barren road. I was already driving a little under the speed limit as deer were out a lot that night. I saw movement up ahead on the right shoulder, and assuming it to be more deer, I slowed way down. As I passed, I saw it was a woman. She was tall, lean, long brunette hair, wearing a white crop top shirt, blue plaid pleated skirt, and knee-high stockings. Honestly, looked like a Halloween outfit. Walking with the traffic, so I saw her from behind, just off of the shoulder in the short grass. I immediately assumed car breakdown or fight with SO and had been put out as she was miles from any house or business. I pulled over to a stop, hit the flashers, took a flashlight, and went to see if she was all right. When I got to the rear of the camper, there was no one there. She could not have made it through the ditch, over the fence, and into the woods in the time it took me to get to the rear of the camper. I was far enough ahead that she could not have made it to the rear of the camper before me. I walked back to where she had been, and I saw no sign that the heavy dew in the grass had been disturbed. She had just vanished into thin air without a trace she had ever been there. I made the rest of the trip home with the hair in my neck standing on end. I wish I had a dash cam back then. It was about 2 a.m. and I knew this town had a reputation for shady people. I was coming home from visiting family on the other side of the state. I first noticed the headlights behind me just outside of town. I thought it might have been the local police department, so I slowed down a bit because I didn't want to give them a reason to pull me at 2 a.m. The vehicle slowed with me but stayed behind me. I guessed it had to be a police officer. I also knew I was getting tired and needed some caffeine. Seeing an open gas station ahead, I decided to swing in and grab a drink. When I pulled in, so did the other vehicle. Looking in my rear-view mirror, I saw it definitely was not a police cruiser. The car did not go to the pumps or to the store itself, but hung back trying to stay out of the streetlights. I made a decision to not get out and verify whether I was being followed. I turned out of the parking lot and back onto the highway. Looking in the mirror, I saw the same car get back on the road with me. I did not have a cell phone at the time, so there was no calling for help, nor was I about to let this continue. I had to act fast and planned on turning the tables on whoever was in the car following me. I knew there was a Walmart not far up the road and they have a well-lit parking lot with cameras. I turned in and continued to drive normally. The other car continued to follow me. That's when I made my move. I dumped my truck into second gear and gunned it to create space, turned into the parking area away from any other cars and dropped into first gear. I then applied the brake while turning the wheel and sliding across the pavement, opening my door and stepping out of the truck while it was still moving. I knew the engine would shut off once the truck was moving too slow. I drew my firearm and moved towards the other vehicle, aiming for the driver and shouting at them. They sped out of the parking lot and drove off as fast as they could, and I finished my trip. I guess they thought 3-on-1 in the middle of the night was going to be an easy target. Unfortunately, their target was me, a combat veteran who works in law enforcement.